The Japanese Grand Prix showcased some intriguing conflicts within the Mercedes team, but this isn't the first time we've seen disagreements between Russell and Hamilton. Recently, some people have felt that George Russell acted like the team's leader, even though Hamilton is a 7-time world champion. However, when Russell had the most responsibility, he couldn't perform well. In the previous race in Singapore, he was given priority, but couldn't handle the pressure from Norris and Hamilton, leading to a crash. So many started wondering, does he have the right to request team orders? The Japanese Grand Prix showcased that Lewis Hamilton and George Russell are finally living up to the excitement their partnership promised in Formula One last year. They raced closely together, battling Ferrari for victory in Singapore, and in Japan they fought for lower positions, but their frustration on team radio was even more intense. It was Mercedes team boss Toto Wolff who decided that Russell should allow Hamilton to pass in the final stages. The team debated whether to switch their positions or grant Russell's request to let Hamilton stay behind until the last lap so they could defend against Carlos Sainz's Ferrari together. The radio communication during this situation and their earlier intense battle on the track brought attention to Russell and Hamilton's relationship. Despite their calm post-race comments, the race itself was still highly captivating. In the end, Mercedes made the right decision. During the race, George Russell was the only driver who managed to make a single pit stop. He was in 5th place, holding on to that position with old hard tyres, when his teammate Lewis Hamilton, who had slightly fresher hard tyres by 10 laps, caught up with him. Hamilton warned his Mercedes team that they were at risk of losing both of their positions if Russell didn't let him pass. Just 1 lap later, Hamilton received assurance that Russell had been instructed to swap positions at turn 1. Russell, however, had a different idea. He suggested, why don't we invert on the last lap and he just stays in DRS like last week, unless he's fighting for a bigger result. But the decision had already been made and the team instructed Russell to swap positions with Hamilton. This situation was different from what happened in Singapore, where Carlos Sainz successfully worked together with Lando Norris's McLaren to stay ahead of the pursuing Mercedes drivers. Overtaking at this track was much harder compared to Suzuka, where having better tyres, as both Hamilton and Sainz did over Russell, almost guaranteed an easy pass throughout the race. Mercedes, along with their team boss Wolff, recognized this challenge and didn't want to take the risk of Sainz overtaking both their cars. Even if it meant leaving Russell vulnerable to Sainz, they chose the safer option. On Saturday evening before the race, Mercedes had already acknowledged the need to keep an eye on Ferrari strategically, given the stage of the championship they were in. This decision was a practical one, ensuring that Mercedes had at least one car finishing ahead of Ferrari. This helped minimize the impact on their position in the Constructors Championship, reducing the gap with Ferrari from 24 points to 20. After Hamilton passed Russell, he slowed down a bit on 1 lap to allow Russell to use DRS to defend against Sainz. However, Russell's tyres were not in great shape by the time they reached the chicane. When he accelerated out of the chicane, his tyres struggled, and Sainz easily overtook him on the way to turn 1. Hamilton expressed his frustration on the radio, feeling that they had wasted time for no good reason, and he reiterated this sentiment after the race. Hamilton mentioned that if they had swapped positions earlier in the race, George might have had an easier time keeping Sainz behind. However, because they were fighting each other, it ended up damaging Hamilton's tyres, which complicated things. Hamilton pointed out that their individual positions in the Drivers' Championship didn't matter. What mattered was that one of them finished ahead of the Ferrari to maintain their team's position. He emphasized the importance of working together as a team in this race rather than as individual drivers. Hamilton also explained that it didn't make sense for him to give Russell the DRS because he needed to create as much distance between himself and the cars behind. Russell, after the race, acknowledged that his tyres were in bad shape by the end of the race. He expressed that there were no hard feelings and that the team made the right decision. Both Hamilton and Russell reiterated that in this situation, the team's competition with Ferrari in the Constructors' Championship was more important than their own internal rivalry. During the early stages of the Grand Prix, Russell and Hamilton raced intensely, almost leading to a collision between the two Mercedes drivers. At one point, Russell passed Hamilton as they approached the chicane at the end of lap 5. However, Hamilton managed to regain the lead on the straight, which left Russell confused as he didn't understand how he lost out on the straight. Later in the race, as Hamilton's tyres wore down, he went wide out of Denyer 2, a tricky corner he had struggled with throughout the race due to damage sustained on the opening lap. This allowed Russell to attempt to pass him on the outside at the sweeping spoon left-hander before the back straight. Hamilton barely held onto the corner with his fading tyres, forcing Russell to run off the track. Russell expressed his frustration over the team radio, asking whether they should be fighting each other or their rivals. After the race, Russell had cooled down and described it as hard, fair racing. He explained that the radio communication was a way to release frustration because the race was long, demanding, and required them to fight for every inch on the track. Hamilton admitted to being aggressive but agreed that it was good racing. In the end, it's difficult to say for sure whether the early race battles or the team orders later on significantly affected their race positions. Mercedes took a practical and cautious approach. They allowed their drivers to race each other in the early stages and then stepped in later to secure the positions they believed were achievable. If Russell had held Hamilton in his DRS at the end, it would have been a riskier strategy with the potential for higher rewards. However, it also had downsides, like the possibility of Hamilton losing time and becoming more vulnerable to Sainz. Letting Hamilton pass increased the likelihood of Sainz overtaking Russell, but decreased the chance of Sainz passing both Mercedes. Sainz admitted that when he saw both Mercedes cars together, he expected them to use DRS to help each other, which would have made it harder for him. When asked about what Mercedes should have done, Sainz initially thought they might have had a better chance if Hamilton had stayed behind. But upon further consideration, he believed that Mercedes maintaining their positions could have given him a better opportunity to pass both of them. He thought that trying to overtake Hamilton on track, given their relative speeds, wouldn't have been realistic. Sainz also mentioned that he would have attempted to pass Hamilton if he had stayed behind, especially in certain slow sections of the track where both Mercedes were struggling. The near misses between the drivers early in the race didn't actually make a big difference in terms of time, just a second or two at most. This wouldn't have changed their chances of challenging Charles Leclerc for 4th place, and Sainz would have caught up to them regardless. While the team's priority is clearly to beat Ferrari, it's natural for two competitive drivers to fight fiercely for positions in the heat of the moment, especially given the current situation at Mercedes. Russell is frustrated because he hasn't had the season he hoped for, and his position in the Drivers' Championship is now quite far behind Hamilton, with a 75-point gap. Both drivers are contracted until the end of 2025, so Russell has known for a while that he'll have to compete with Hamilton rather than waiting for him to retire and take on a leadership role within the team. This is likely to lead to more tension and conflicts in the future. For now, both drivers and the team are managing the situation well, maintaining a balance between healthy competition within the team and avoiding any major internal conflict, even though it might not always sound that way on the team radio. Hamilton had a better race overall, which is typical for him. He was faster during the race compared to Russell, and he used clever tactics while racing. He also started to play mind games in the media when he had concerns, possibly related to the development for 2024 or Russell's improved performance data since the mid-season break. In the end, the team got the result they wanted.